Schönen guten Abend. Dear Susanne Eliasson, dear students, dear guests, a very warm welcome to the opening of the Architectural Tuesday, our lecture series during this summer. We welcome our guest, Susanne Eliasson from Paris. And dear Susanne, I will now switch to German to say a few words about the starts of the series and the organization. The lecture itself will be in English. Okay, nochmal also herzlich willkommen zur Eröffnung unseres Architectural Tuesdays im Sommersemester. Und schön, dass Sie trotz dieses Wetters hier sind. Ich verstehe, dass es so schön draußen. Trotzdem, ich freue mich, dass Sie gekommen sind. Im letzten Sommer starteten wir mit dem AT eine Trilogie, die sich der Notwendigkeit einer Neuausrichtung im Architekturdiskurs auf unterschiedlichen Ebenen widmet. Unter dem Titel Neue Werkzeuge im Anthropozän begrüßten wir im ersten Teil Gäste wie Marc Angelil, Elke Krasny, Sebastian Moreau und Fred Fersen. In diesem Sommersemester führen wir, und darüber freuen wir uns ganz besonders, in Kooperation mit der Universität Kaiserslautern die Reihe fort und legen den Schwerpunkt auf die Stadt. Vor dem Hintergrund demografischer und gesellschaftlicher Entwicklungen der Gegenwart und in Anbetracht der aktuellen Umwelt- und Klimakrise. Dazu haben die KuratorInnen Dr. Adria Daraban, vorne steht sie, Professorin für Architektur, Theorie, Geschichte an der Universität Kaiserslautern, und der wissenschaftliche Mitarbeiter Frederik Schnee, spannende Persönlichkeiten sondiert und schließlich eingeladen. Als Kooperationsveranstaltung des Fachbereichs Architektur der Universität Kaiserslautern und unserer Fakultät organisieren wir je 3 Abendveranstaltungen in Köln und in Kaiserslautern. Wir testen das gerade heute, das wird per Zoom jeweils hin und her übertragen. Also auch die Vorträge in Kaiserslautern finden hier im Raum statt. Der Zoom-Link ist auch nur für hier erstmal, später die Aufzeichnung ist zu sehen, aber wir wollen ja, dass die Leute kommen und auch im Austausch sind, deshalb das schon mal als Ankündigung. Und ich hoffe, es funktioniert, da können die Kaiserslauterner uns heute vielleicht Feedback geben. Kurz zum Ablauf nochmal, also nach mir stellen Adria und Frederik kurz das Konzept der heutigen oder der Reihe des Semesters vor. Das machen wir immer am Anfang in der ersten Veranstaltung. Und im Anschluss wird der Student Furkan Eides, dort steht er auch schon, unseren Gast vorstellen. Furkan ist Teil des sogenannten Kollektivs, also es ist ein Zusammenschluss von Studierenden, die mir oder uns bei der Organisation dieser Reihe unterstützen. Im Anschluss an den Vortrag gibt es immer eine Fragerunde, die ich bitte teilzunehmen. Und ja, das war's eigentlich. Ich glaube, die meisten kennen ja den AT und den Ablauf. Insofern gebe ich jetzt weiter an Adria und Frederik.
Herzlichen Dank, Sabine. Ich persönlich freue mich sehr, heute Abend wieder hier zu sein an der Hochschule in Köln, und ich freue mich auch, dass diese Reihe eine Fortsetzung erfährt, auch in der mittlerweile bewährten Team mit Frederik im Rahmen dieser Serie, die wir der Suche nach Werkzeugen oder Instrumenten gewidmet haben. Sabine hat das bereits erwähnt. Wir haben vor einem Jahr angefangen mit einer Reihe, die sich einem Diskurs im Zeichen eines Begriffs widmete, das des Anthropozäns. Dabei merkten wir, wie volatil und auch transitorisch diese Auseinandersetzung eine Art Justierung vorzunehmen und dem nachzuschauen, mit welchem Instrumentarium wir uns einerseits diskursiven Fragen, wie wir das im vergangenen Semester gemacht widmen können. Oder wie in diesem Semester die Absicht ist, Fragen, die das Machen der Stadt, die Teilhabe und Teilnahme am Stadtmachen vor allem betreffen. Die Reihe, also, die wir heute einführen, befasst sich vor allem mit Fragen der Raumproduktion, die im Kontext demografischer und gesellschaftlicher Veränderungen stattfinden. Wir beschäftigen uns aber auch mit Debatten, auch mit virulenten Debatten um Themen der Diversität, der Bodenfrage, der Inklusion. Also das heißt, auf der Ebene dieser Diskussion werden unsere Gäste, die in unterschiedlicher Weise engagiert sind in dieser Debatten, uns einerseits Case Studies, aber auch teilweise dramatisch oder misslungen gewordene Auseinandersetzungen mit diesen Debatten vorstellen werden. Das heißt, in dieser Weise lernen wir Instrumente kennen oder Werkzeuge kennen, die zum Teil funktionieren oder auch nicht. Wir wollen auch die Reihe fortsetzen, auch mit einer dritten Fassung, vielleicht in einem Jahr, die sich von der Stadtebene auf die Objektebene weiter bewegt. Also mit Susanne Eliasson fangen wir heute an. Gäste wie Jesko Feser, aber auch Amy Thomas, Tatjana Schneider, Anne-Julchen Bernhard und Boris Sieverts und Markus Miesen werden uns dabei unterstützen, dieser Auseinandersetzung nachzuvollziehen. Frederik, du möchtest auch vielleicht auch zum jetzigen Abend und auch zum Auftakt unserer Reihe ein paar Gedanken aus dem Konzept noch vorstellen. Gerne weiter.
Ja, ich würde es noch kurz halten. Also wir stellen uns die Frage, wie ist das Wachsen einer Stadt, das kollektive Gedächtnis möglich, also der urbane Ausdruck eines sozialen Miteinanders. Und wir wollen die virulenten Debatten, den Architekturdiskurs im Zusammenhang mit dem Gemeinschaftsleben im urbanen Raum betrachten. Es geht um Themen wie Diversität, Bodenfrage, Fürsorge, den Baubestand des Stadtteams. Also das sind auch in den Fotos, kann man das ein bisschen erkennen, worum es geht. Es geht um Diversität und Bodenfrage. Wir hoffen uns auch dadurch Vorschläge in unseren Wissen für Instrumente, eine gemeinschaftlich orientierte Stadt und eine Raumproduktion. Und ja, wir sind sehr gespannt auf den Gastvortrag und Studentin Vortrag wird kurz noch eine Kurzbiografie vorstellen. Dann fangen wir endlich an mit dem Vortrag.
Ja, herzlich willkommen auch von meiner Seite zum ersten Vortrag der Architectural Tuesday-Reihe. Mein Name ist Susanne Eliasson, ich bin Architekturstudent hier auch an der TH Köln, befinde mich im zweiten Semester in der Mastervertiefung Strategien des Entwerfens und Konstruierens und werde Ihnen jetzt kurz mal was zu unserem Gast erzählen. Susanne Eliasson ist eine schwedisch-französische Architektin und neben Anthony James Mitbegründerin des Architekturbüros GRAU, das sie 2010 gründeten. Und beide haben ihr Studium an der École Nationale Supérieure d'Architecture in Versailles abgeschlossen. Susanne erwarb zusätzlich noch in einem einjährigen Studium an der University of Illinois in Chicago ihren Mastertitel. Und bevor GRAU entstand, war sie bei der AUC Agency tätig, wo sie unter anderem an den Projekten Greater Paris Study und New Chapel International District arbeitete. Susanne lehrte im Jahr 2019 bis 2022 als Gastprofessorin an der PBSA in Düsseldorf. Die Agentur GRAU steht für Good Reasons to Afford Urbanism und operiert im Spannungsfeld zwischen der Architektur und dem Städtebau, welche zudem im Jahr 2016 mit dem Palmeiras des Jeunes Urbanistes ausgezeichnet wurden. Das Büro mit Sitz in Paris fokussiert sich primär auf Wohnungsbau mit Bezug auf die Stadt im Gesamten und untersucht dabei speziell die Wohnung als Schnittstelle zwischen Intimität und Verbundenheit zu der Gesellschaft. Im Zuge dessen führen sie seit 2010 Stadterneuerungsstudien anhand Wohnviertel aus den 1950er, 60er und 70er Jahren durch und beschäftigen sich aktuell auch mit der Erneuerung der Grand Park Area und der Transformation der Cité Clairvaux in Bordeaux. GRAU beschäftigt sich zudem noch mit dem Wohnen, auch mit Studien zu Gartenstätten, die sie besonders im Zusammenhang mit dem Kauderanviertel in Bordeaux untersuchen und weiterentwickeln. In ihrem Büro beschäftigt sich Susanne aktuell auch mit diversen anderen Stadterinnerungsobjekten mit der Garden METROPOLIS, eine Art Wohnurbanisierung, die im 20. Jahrhundert aus der direkten Erweiterung urbaner Stadtzentren entstand. Und nicht zuletzt gewann sie die Ausschreibung für die Neugestaltung des Gebiets um Notre-Dame de Paris in Frankreich. Nun möchte ich das Wort unserem Gast überlassen.
Thank you. Do you hear me well? Yes. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. I will speak today largely about the idea of living together in a certain urban condition that we call the garden metropolis. But before that, I just have to say, of course, we do lectures quite regularly. There's always a theme to the invitation, to the lectures we are asked to give, but I have rarely felt so attached to the theme of the lecture that this lecture series that you're proposing today. And there was specifically one sentence in the brief that says, how can we design built environments that offer both room for individual expression and communal engagement? That was a sentence that really spoke to us, because I think it's the exact thing that we are focused on, working on a daily basis, and the question that we ask ourselves everywhere in every context that we intervene. So I'm very happy today to speak to you about all of this a little bit. Just to give a very brief introduction, so I am a partner of and co-founder of this. Very often find it difficult to really understand what it is that we do, because we build some buildings, not a lot, and when we do, we tend to want them to disappear, as you will see later. We do work on planning the future of the city, but very rarely with master plans or tools like that. We do research, but it's always connected to a project, so it's in the office. It's sort of it follows the project. And so very often people, they don't really know where to categorize us. And so I think in the first couple of years when we had the office, that was a handicap, sure, to get commissions with the public. And now we're at this point, 15 years almost, that we've had the office, where it's just, we feel like this is the way it is. And it is also something that we accept, because we just follow and do what we are interested in. So this is actually the first page of our current portfolio, which expresses a little bit this idea. It's in French, but it says essentially that grau, as you know, means gray in German. It's also a reference to the paintings of Gerhard Richter. Gray, black, not all white. It's the color that contains all the color when you mix them together. And it also stands for good reasons to afford urbanism, but that was something that we came up with after a while, just and use right now. This is a few images that shows quite well, I think, our universe, or the way the kind of elements that we work with in the office, our ideas, and they all very much relate to the city and to the people. And so I wanted to show you a couple of images that for us speaks quite well about the questions that we are concerned with in the city. This is Paris. This is a picture you can see in the background. This is the new Olympic arena, which was a project that we were involved with. But what you see most is the cars, the colors, the individual, the collective, a city that is always changing, a little bit of sky, but a lot of gray in the city. You have one tree. Essentially, what you see is the city. It's this kind of matter, which is where architecture is just one thing. And it's at some point It's not a building in itself that is interesting, but it's what all the buildings, when they start to meld together, is able to produce. Now, the city it's the place where we live together. It has always been the place where we live together. We come together for multiple reasons, whether they were economic, for security, to bond with different people. And it's the place where we meet. And this kind of meeting between individuals, it requires a collective organization of some sort. This is a picnic. Here you have the fabric, which becomes the place, the physical manifestation of this collective organization where people can gather and get together around. I think this connection and what holds things together in south of Brussels, which is have very small houses, almost farmhouses, that are standing next to these big boxes. Here you have a big blue IKEA box. And what holds all of this together at some point is the nature. And this is really what interests us in architecture. And because for us, architecture belongs to the city, it's how we can work spatially to design places where we can live well together. It's the only question that obsesses us, I think, in the everyday life, and where we can live together as people, all kinds of living things. Here you have this is a photo of a place in Phoenix that I will show you later. It's housing, and you have this little cat, and you can't see it in the photo, but there is another cat in the other house in front, and they are constantly looking for each other in this urban environment. Of course, the way we live together, it has to do sometimes with very small things. This is a barbecue also that I will show you later in one of our projects. It has to do with the living things in our environment. It has to do with the amenities that we are able to collectively create. This is a swimming pool, some of you may know, which is in Berlin, a very nice place. And it has to do with light, with air, with seasons, all of this coming together and being able to create environments where we are more or less well as individuals, and then more or less well as collective also entities. It has to do sometimes with tiny things. This is just small cars that we have in the office and that we play around with very often when we design projects, not to play, but just because the question of the car and the mobility is always the issue. And so we really use this and try to also never forget it and focus on it. So I think that living together today in the city has to do with all of these things. It has to do with how a building is able to respond and to fit the purpose of the building, which is essentially to help people live better lives alone and together. It has to do also with how it reacts to a context, urban context, natural context, cultural context. And for us, it has absolutely nothing to do with style, in the sense of the style of the architecture. Now, I will show you today this is a black screen. I will show you now a couple of projects that we are working on, focusing essentially on this idea of the Garden Metropolis. But before that, I just wanted to say a couple of words to try to give our context and the context of the reality in which we as architects and we as human beings also are operating in today. Now, I will not go deeply into the fact that we are living in a society that is in crisis. There is an ecological crisis. We all know it. We've known it for more than 50 years. I mean, when you read a book from the 1970s, you can get the sense that you are reading the book of today, because they are saying the exact same thing that we are saying today. This is a fact. We know a few solutions that we would need to implement, but most of it has to do with the fact that we know that we have to deeply change the system that we are living in. And I think that most of us agree on this idea today. I think there's quite a wide consensus on this idea, but we don't know how to do it because of the system, the economic system that we are in, that is so deeply wrenched. And so we are essentially walking around in our profession, I think specifically, but just generally in the world, we are walking around knowing that the things that matter the most, we cannot change, we cannot choose. Of course, you choose, the people you love, that's something, and it's a good thing, but that's personal. So I'm speaking about the things in society that matter to us, the real changes that we would like to make, we have very little touch upon. It's a fact, it's a reality, it's quite depressing on an everyday basis to know that, but it's the truth. And so I think that it leads also today, and this is something that we see in the profession, but also in architecture school. I think that it leads to a certain retreat into aesthetics. That because we cannot really pick and choose the things that matter, we choose what we can. We can choose our clothes, we can choose what kind of chairs we buy for our kitchen, etc. And we spend a lot of time making these choices because we have a lot of choice. So it takes up a lot of time. And even in architecture, it becomes very often a question of choosing what kind of style of building we want to design. And as time goes by, there's a lot of styles to choose from. And do you like postmodernism or modernism? And it's, of course, aesthetics has its importance. And I have aesthetic preferences. Everyone has aesthetic preferences. But I think that it becomes something that we tend to retreat into. I also see a tendency today for people, because it's so hard to do architecture. It's a difficult profession. And because it's so difficult and because we have very little influence on the things that maybe we would like to influence, I see a tendency also to say, well, architecture is, it's the act of building. It's just the act of building. And it's not. It's not just the act of building. Of course it is. And knowing how to build and knowing how it works is extremely important, but it's not just the act of building. Architecture is a social profession. And the way we think about spaces, whether it's spaces that we create or that we transform, it has an impact on the way people live. And we have to do everything that we can in our power on a daily basis to be invested, because if we have chosen this profession, I have, and I've been doing it for 15 years, and it is important. And even if it's just step by step in every single project, that we can create spaces where people just get together a little bit better, then that makes a difference. And I want to insist on that, because I think that's the reason for why we have cities. Cities are places where people come together, and they come together to cooperate. And when we cooperate, we are stronger, and then we can solve the large problems. I just wanted to get this straight, because this is a little bit the philosophy that we are operating in, that we have to remind ourselves on a daily basis. Because again, it's a difficult profession. You are confronted constantly with a lot of absurdities and with a lot of difficulties to change things. But I'm deeply convinced that it's possible to change things little by little and doing what we can. But we have to be invested, and we have to admit that it's a social profession also, and not just the act of building, as it is sometimes said today. So that was just to get the context, our context straight. You can disagree with me, but this is the context that we are operating in. And so I wanted to speak specifically today about a certain kind of environment, which is what we call the garden metropolis. It's a context that we've been working on for almost the 15 years that we have had the office. So what is the garden metropolis? It's a little bit what you see in this image. Essentially, it's the urbanization, mostly residential, that has occurred in the last 150 years as a direct extension of city centers. And so it's not the complete suburban condition. It's not the central cities that we know of where you have shops, etc. It's something that is mostly residential, very few public spaces, and it's a huge part of our urban environment. This is a picture of a Côte-d'Or in Bordeaux that we know really well. We have been working on these kind of territories for quite a while now by picking commissions or going into territories that were like this territory. And so we've made it a bit of a subject of investigation. And 2 years ago in Bordeaux, we did an exhibition titled The Garden Metropolis, where we looked at 4 different cities that we know of because we have been working in them or doing research. 2 European one, Bordeaux and Brussels, and 2 American, Phoenix and Chicago. And we wanted to, with this exhibition, to kind of put the finger on this type of urbanization, which is, in terms of surface produced in the world, huge, but that we find very difficult to deal with because it's mostly individual. It's very hard to kind of read the structure, the logics. There is very little public space. There is density, but not enough to implement public transits, etc. And so we're kind of lost into how to intervene within it. And you have on the other side, you have the extreme suburbia where everyone is saying this is so terrible, so bad, and we should retreat the city and sort of suppress the extreme suburbia. The kind of urbanization that we're speaking about here, it is the city. And it's the majority of the city that we have today in the world. And so we have to look at it and try to understand it and see how it can evolve. So we did an exhibition where we put these 4 cities together and really just look at the urban fabric. So here you can see Bordeaux, Codéran. You see in red, it's the housing. In blue, it's the activity. It's a very kind of spaghetti structure because it was urbanized from traditional villages. It's in Bordeaux, so it's a very flat city that you can see here, but I will get back to that later. This is Phoenix in Arizona, so it's a completely different context. It's the American grid, it's the activity corridors. And yet what we try to argue is that there are common characteristics and that people who live there don't live so differently from the way they live in Bordeaux-Codéran. This is Phoenix, again, a very flat environment. The backdrop is the mountain in the back of the desert. This is Brussels, south of Brussels. So you have a fabric where you have the housing, but you also have these big activity zones that you find in these kind of territories. And even agriculture, sometimes pockets of agriculture in this kind of fabric. And then we have Chicago on the west side. This is Lawndale, which is still, you have the American grid, like in Phoenix, but it's completely different because it's not the same dimensions. It's not organized in the same way. And it's quite dense. And it's quite interesting when you compare these 4 fabrics. So here you see Chicago. When you compare them and you measure them, you realize that in terms of density, in terms of space for landscape, etc., they are actually quite similar. And of course, they're hugely different. And you cannot make the same projects on all these areas, but they are also, they belong in a way in a certain category of cities that we need to deal with because we have produced them in such a huge quantity. And that was also part of the exhibition. We did this room where we put all the fabrics together, and we put the fabric in red also, which is a color that we use when we work because it speaks of housing, and housing for us is an issue. But it's also a way to say this is quite, for some people, it was quite violent, this room. And it's just to say, well, this is what we've produced, this is what we have. This is the urban fabrics that we are dealing with. And now in the future, the question is not so much about producing new ones, but it's how will we live in these fabrics? And what kind of a collective also life can we provide in this fabric because people need it. And so that was the whole point of the exhibition. And then we showed research on these different cities. We did a few small books where you could sit down and just read and relax and take some time to look at all this. This is the fabric and the room that was shaped in this round shape to connect all these cities together. So I will today speak more specifically about the urban fabric of Bordeaux, about the Garden Metropolis, and about the district of Codéran. Bordeaux is a city that we've been working on for ever since we started the office in 2010. We started by working with the Belgian office 51 and 4E on a study that was called 50,000 dwellings around public transport. And it was a study to see how the city could accommodate 50,000 new dwellings and how we could build better, faster, cheaper housing units within the urban context. And so with this study, we developed different concepts or ways of intervening. It was a very large scale study. We worked with large scale maps. And at the same time, we worked very precisely on housing typologies, etc. And we defined 4 hypotheses for intervening in this context and ideas. And one of the hypotheses was to say that, as you can see on this image, Bordeaux is a horizontal city. It's very flat. You only have a couple of buildings that emerge. Most of the city is made up of 2-story urban fabric, so very, very flat, where the traditional ingredient is what we call the échoppe. And so the échoppe is what you see here on this photograph. It's a 1-story narrow row house that was introduced in the 15th century in the city, and it was a place for craftsmen where they lived. And it makes up a big part of the city. It's a quite dense fabric, so it goes directly on the street, and then you have the garden in the back. And it has since, of course, become a very attractive housing typology. So all these houses today are only living typologies. And the échoppe is one of the urban fabric that composes the district of Codéron, which is a large district that you see here in red in the city of Bordeaux. It's a district that spans 750 hectares with 45,000 inhabitants. It used to be a separate town to Bordeaux, and it was incorporated in the city in 1964, 65. I might be mistaken between 4 and 5, somewhere around that. It was incorporated into the city, and it's now a neighborhood of the city of Bordeaux. And so it has transformed over time into a major residential area. And we were commissioned by the city in 2013. So this was following the study that we had done on 50,000 units. We were commissioned by the city along with French landscape architects Claire and Michel Courajou to do a study on the whole district with the aim to define how the district could evolve in time and how it could also be densified, because there's a large potential for densification. Now, as I said, the city has grown over time into a residential area. It has urbanized from the city center outwards, but also as an extension sort of existing hamlets. You can see here is a piece of the district, and you can see all the buildings in black were built before 1950. All the buildings in red were built after 1950. And so today it's essentially a residential territory. And when you walk around in the sort of continuous urbanization, it's very diverse. But you have a series of common characteristics, notably this fact that the built forms and the landscape forms are always in connection. So you have the very small houses that have these very small front gardens that are sort of, they correspond in terms of proportion. And you have the big housing residences that are built on traditional large individual properties. So they have these huge parks where the trees are very old. And so it really it becomes the sort of collective landscape of the district. So there is this correspondence between the scale of the landscape and the scale of the building. And then the other interesting thing is that because there is very little public space, the public space is essentially the street. And so it's actually the private domain, meaning the front gardens, etc., that are creating the qualities of the public space. And this is not something common in France. In France, we have a clear separation between what is public and what is private. So this kind of interlapping is very interesting. And this is the situation that you find everywhere in Codéron. So you have these small gardens, and then you have these big landscapes, which are connected to collective residences, which are very high quality in terms of housing quality. And so what we try to do with this sort of common characteristic is we try to find a way to not look at it as just some continuous urbanization, but see how can we define it? What kind of characteristics can we find? And we walked around the neighborhoods many days, and we managed to make sort of a cartography and to categorize this big fabric into 4 different urban fabrics, which is on one hand, the individual fabric with the small houses, the front gardens, the collective one that I spoke about, where you have these very large residences and parkscapes, the sort of mixed, more hybrid fabric, which was mainly along the main axis leading into the city center of Bordeaux. And then, of course, you have the traditional Échoppe fabric, which is built all around the street and with these kind of lush gardens that are on the inside. And then from this four fabrics that we had identified, we asked ourselves the question of how can each fabric evolve in time, all the while keeping its DNA. So not to say we're going to densify everything in the same way, but how can we act on the individual fabric while keeping also the qualities of this fabric? How can we act on the collective, etc.? And of course, this has to do with housing typologies and what kind of typologies we put into the context and how they interact with the existing context. And the main challenge, I would say, in Côte d'Ivoire, because it's the main fabric, just as in the rest of the garden metropolis, is the individual fabric of how we can transform the individual fabric, densify it, but not just densify to densify and to put new buildings, etc., but densify it while adding more qualities, while adding also maybe more landscape, while adding also potentials for collectivity. Because what's quite evident, and what I think that we very often neglect, is that we're speaking all the time about how lifestyles are changing in the city and how people live differently, etc. Well, they change here too, exactly in the same way, if not sometimes faster. So you have in these kind of individual landscapes, you have elderly people who want all of a sudden, they want more connections with other people. You have single parent families who want to live in a small house, but they want a really small garden because they don't have time and money and effort to put into gardening. And so there is this kind of shift, and there is a real demand also for different ways of living and different ways of living collectively. And so we did a lot of research during this study, and we came across the work of an American architect called Alfred Newman Beadle, who has built several projects in Phoenix, Arizona. So in 2014, we traveled to Phoenix to look at a few of his work. So this is the Phoenix fabric that I showed before. Now, Phoenix is a desert city. It's located in the middle of the Sonora Desert in Arizona. It's a city that has grown spectacularly in the last 60 years, from 60,000 inhabitants to 1.5 million. And this is suburbs excluded. So it was a growth explosion starting from the 1950s. It's the kind of third generation American city. Of course, it's hugely attractive still, but with the climate problems, etc., there are speculations on the fact that Phoenix maybe in 100 years will be no more. But still today it's growing and it's expanding. And in the 50s, there were a lot of architects, American architects from the north, from Wisconsin, from Illinois, who went down to Phoenix and who settled there, just like Frank Lloyd Wright, where you have Taliesin West. And Alfred Beadle was one of these architects, and he built one of the projects. This was how we found it. His project is one of the only two collective housing projects in the case study program. And it's this one, and it's called the Triad Apartment. So you can find it if you look at the case study programs. It was labeled under Daily Associate because it was collaborating at that time with an architect from Phoenix, and it was called Daily. And it's a case study apartment. It's a very small project, 3 units put together around a common space. Here you can see the space in the middle. This is Phoenix. It's very hot. So you have the wooden beams. You have a pergola, sort of a web above to cool the environment. And you have these units who are fully glazed, who are looking onto each other, and who are also, you have the parking space, and you have a common, like a washing machine that is next to the parking space. Very simple project. It was built on a 1-story with the kind of proportions of the beams that you could find in the market at that time. So it was a cheap construction, and the houses were quite small for American standards. So it was a very cheap project. And he aimed with this first project to show that you could build high quality, affordable housing for people that were neither collective nor individual. And it's a very interesting thing to visit. But of course, it's a small scale to prove that you can actually do it in an affordable way. I should stop maybe. This is the time now. So it was difficult for him to show. I will speed up, maybe. I can do faster. It was difficult for him to show that you could do it economically on such a small scale. So he made other projects, and this is another one, which is called the Boardwalk Apartments. It's 34 units. It's built on the same principle as the Triad, so it's on a modular grid. It's low-rise, one-story units around a common open space in the middle where you walk. The parking spaces are always put on the outside. So you park your car and then you walk around in this environment and you walk home. This is the boardwalk from the outside. It looks almost like the Farnsworth House. And it's completely open, and you can see the landscape vegetation. It's been growing since this was built in the 60s, so it's been really growing, and it's quite lush. And you walk inside, it's completely open. You walk through this environment, and you have the landscape like this. And then you have all the units. They are fully glazed. They are overlooking this collective space. This is where I showed the cats before. But the fact that you have this distance of 17 meters between the units, and the fact that you have this landscape and that works with different transitions, etc., nothing is closed off, but everyone has his own intimacy, his own privacy in a way. And at the same time, there's a huge collective environment, which is highly qualitative. Here is one of the people who lived on number 34. People are very happy to live here. They come and talk to you. They are happy to show you their home. You have lots of elderly people and lots of younger people who are working at home. And so people interact, people talk to each other, etc. This is inside. It's fully glazed on the outside. Everyone has the right to sort of use their space in front how they want. They can garden it if they want to. But they're not obliged to. So there's also a landscaper that comes in and that can actually manage it for you if you do not want. So it's this flexibility. This is another one of his projects. It's called the Three Fountain. It's a bit denser because it's on 2 stories, but it's essentially the same principle. So it's in the Phoenix grid. You have these units that are put together. You have a common collective promenade in the middle. The parking is on the lateral alleys. This is from the outside. It's always very welcoming. There's a sort of public address to the place, and it's open. You can go in. It's shaded, so it's very cool also. It's one of the coolest places. All these operations, it's so hot in Phoenix, and you go in and it's fresh. Natural ventilation and air conditioning in the space. And you have these, so these are houses on 2 stories, quite small again for American standard, very cheaply built. And every house has this private patio in the back with a door so you can walk out on the other side. It's nothing exceptional, but it's the way they are put together. It's the proportion, it's the landscape, it's the connection between the houses, which means that they are quite dense, but there's proximity without promiscuity in a way. And it constitutes an environment in itself where you have this real association between landscape and the garden. And this is, for us, I mean, we've been there twice to visit. It's magnificent places to be in. It's really incredible. And so for us, it's also examples of projects that work where you have this great balance between individual and collective. And they are denser than what we have in most of the urban environments that I'm speaking about, but they are still individual size in a way. So it's not about building large collective houses, but you build something that is denser and also that has more collective quality. And whereas there is just a potential for people to meet. So this is very interesting for us, and it's something that we try to work on now in the context where we are operating in France. And we very just recently finished a project north of Bordeaux, which is a project of 22 social housing units that you see here. It's in it's in a kind of semi-rural area. It's really north of the urbanization of Bordeaux. It's been densifying with this kind of, you see the pink operations, which is mostly houses centered around car-driven developments. And we have this very narrow plot in the middle of this kind of environment where we are building one single horizontal building with 22 units. We have both individual and collective that open up to this collective promenade. So it's, if you want, it's the Beetle principle, but just cut in half because we're on a very narrow plot. But it's really that. It's a clear inspiration to that. And so the project is divided in 4 main sequences. You have the front garden, which is open to the public, which is again quite rare in France to actually manage to do. There is what we call a mobility platform. So you park the car at the entrance and then you stop. There is no more car going in the back. And so the rest is a promenade. You have also between the car and the collective houses, you have what we call the foyer, which is a space for people to meet. You have a barbecue. And I'll show you a couple of pictures. It's very long, so it's hard to look at. So I'm just showing it through like this. This is the foyer with the bike storage. And then you have the units. They are all cross-ventilated. They all have their very private outdoor living room in the back. And then they have the promenade in the front. You have apartments, so 1-bedroom apartments, but you also have 2 and 3 bedroom houses, which are on 2 stories. And the bathrooms open up to the collective promenade. Of course, the glazing is not is sort of opaque, but you have a real connection to the promenade. It's a very basic project in terms of low tech, nothing exceptional. It's just cross ventilation. There are awnings on both sides to protect from the sun. There is an opening in the roof. So it's extremely simple, quite cheap. It's social housing. It was just finished. So here you see the beginning of the front garden that is going to come together. You see the pergola, which is going to be planted, but you see the cars, you see the roof on behind, which is what we call the foyer that you can see here. And here you see the operation before it was planted of the building, 22 units. The idea is also to say, whether you live in a house or in an apartment, it's the same. And we make no distinction. You all have the same quality and you all live together. And what you get is the sort of collective landscape. And that's what counts. And that is what we found in the Beetle project. And then we have this barbecue because it's very hot. It's in Bordeaux. And it's nice also to be able to imagine that you're under one roof and you can barbecue. Here you see the entrances to the collective apartments. So they go up. You see the bathroom that is behind this glazing, which we enlarged so that you could dry your clothes, etc. in it. They are cross-ventilated. So here we're looking from one of the small patios, the garden. You see the awning that sort of produces shade, which is important, climatically speaking. But it's also important because this awning, it goes all the way. And so it connects you in a way symbolically with the neighbor next to you, even if you are between 2 walls. And it's not nothing. It's a detail, but it's important. You can see it here. So it goes all the way. And it's a collective awning and it's a collective climatic cover. This is from the inside, a couple of pictures. The light changes during the day, the play with shadows. It all goes into the operation. Here you see again the small patio from the bathroom where you're overlooking the collective promenade. This is on the top floor of a house where we have this space between the rooms, and it's very basic, but it's just a little bit enlarged and with the light from the top, so you can imagine that the space becomes something else than just a corridor. And to finish, the foyer, the barbecue that is overlooking the other individual buildings. You can see the context, it's very individual. So the whole challenge in the project for us, it really lies in this the way we design this sort of threshold in the dimension and the way we conceive this sort of intermediate space so that everyone keeps their privacy, which is an important part. You also want to be in your house and have your privacy, but at the same time create the potential for collectivity, not to force it, but to create the will to maybe some children. We've seen them. We started to see them. Some children will run and play with each other. It can be very small things, but that's the way it starts. And it has to be working without being imposed. And the question of the threshold is it's an important question for us in the project that we work in, because it's where you have this interaction between the private and the collective. So very briefly, I wanted to show you another project in Bordeaux that we have been working on for almost 10 years now, which is called Cité Clairvaux. It's a social housing site. It was built in the 50s. It's 450 individual dwellings, social housing. When it was built with the principles of the garden city. You can see here, this is the scale of the operation. What they did, which is very strange, is that they built every house on a grid that is tilted 28 degrees from the rest of the city. So this creates a very peculiar situation. You see it in the aerial view here, which could be nice, but it creates a lot of distance of the houses from the street. You have these triangular spaces everywhere. And they were, of course, envisioned to be collective spaces, to be occupied, to be gardens, etc. But in time, it's just a big amount of public space to maintain. And so it has developed like this. So you have basically spaces where people do nothing, and you have the house that just stops in the middle. And so we have been working now for several years with a social housing developer who owns the buildings and the neighborhood to see how we can transform them. So there is an architect, a French architect called Construire, the office, which is linked to Patrick Bouchon, maybe some of you know him, which have renovated all the units, the housing units. And we are working on the general area. And so what we're trying to do is to say, well, this area is so specific in terms of urban fabric. It's so, if you wanted to make it traditional, to just cut it up and make it basic, you would have to demolish everything. I mean, you really have to play with what you have because it's so specific. And so we try to work on the qualities of this, what we call the tissu claveau, so the claveau fabric. One of the main qualities is that you have a front and back access. So you enter your house from the street, but you also have a back access to your garden. And there is potential for collective space in the back. And so we started to play with this fabric. And in the beginning, we spent a week on site with the inhabitants. And this was a demand also of the social housing developer who wanted to have a project that was co-constructed and co-designed with the inhabitants. So we did workshops on site, and we tested different actions. And one of the subjects was this kind of question of the threshold. What do you do in front of your house? And can it be a space that you occupy? Can it be a space of interaction? So we simulated these kind of things, and then we came up in the end with this sort of very colorful plan, which is not a master plan, but which is a set of ingredients that were all designed and approved by the inhabitants to transform the district. And so it becomes a sort of a roadmap for the transformation, which is happening very gradually. It's a very long process because it costs money that the social housing developer does not have, but it becomes a guideline. And so the district is changing in time. This is a few of the actions that have been made. It's that we designed at the beginning a tree nursery in the middle of the district, and it's been renewed 3 times ever since. And so the plants from the tree nurseries, they go into the gardens of the inhabitants, or in front. They really serve the neighborhood, and it's become a very central place of the neighborhood. Then we've been experimenting with different planting strategies because the ground is very bad quality, and they don't have the money also to really come and dig everything up and change the soil. So we are adding soil onto the areas in front of the houses, and we're planting in different ways to sort of occupy the space. We are creating new pathways between the buildings so that people can also walk home without being completely drenched in with their shoes. And these pathways are leading also to the communal spaces in the back. And then we are slowly transforming this kind of thresholds around the buildings where people can use these spaces and occupy them in a different way. And then with the sort of surplus of spaces, because there is a lot of space to maintain, we are also, there's also architects that are building a couple of collective buildings for the elderly people who live in the houses and who cannot anymore live well in the house because they have to walk up to be able to stay in the neighborhood, and so to move to apartment buildings, which are smaller, and to be able also to accommodate new families coming in and to sort of create renewal within the district, but without pushing people out of it. If you visit it today, you will see all these transformations. You will also see areas that look exactly like I showed you in the beginning. It's a very slow process, but it's happening, and we have some kind of a guide, and it all relies on this sort of interaction between the house, which is individual, of course, but the way all these houses together, they form a collective fabric. And that is all that we are sort of interested in. I will just finish by showing a couple of pictures of a project that has nothing to do, and at the same time, I think everything to do with what I've been speaking about. And it's in the middle of Paris. So it's not in the Garden Metropolis per se. It's around the Notre Dame Cathedral. It's a project that we are doing with Belgian landscape architect Basmet. And we did a competition 2 years ago on the refurbishment of all the collector spaces around the cathedral. We won the competition, which was quite unexpected. And so now we are stuck with doing this thing around the cathedral, which is fascinating, of course. But it's really, for us, it was it's typically the context in which we do not work. But so just to give very brief context, you have the Notre Dame Cathedral. In the 60s, the space in front was a big roundabout for cars. There were lots of accidents because tourists were taking pictures and getting run over, etc. And so the city said, we have to do something, and we have to also make more spaces for the cars because this was the 60s. And so we are going to build an underground parking space, and we are going to make a plaza in front. And when they started to dig to put in the underground parking space, they found that on the other image, which is essentially the remains of the city dating back all the way to 2,000 years ago on the Ile de la Cité. So they found all these remains. And of course, they stopped everything and they said, okay, we have to do an archaeological crypt to house all this heritage. And there is a crypt today. So if you go today, you have the plaza and you have a crypt underneath. Very interesting to see. It's not very known, but it's interesting to see. And so the parking space, of course, couldn't be right in front of the cathedral, but they say we still have to do the parking space. So they did the parking space right next to the crypt. So here you see a picture of, you can see all the old remains over there. And then you can see the beginning of the parking structure being built underground of Notre Dame. And so the question in the competition that we were asked was to say, okay, we have to refurbish the places around, but you have to do something with this parking space because now we are in 2019. We don't want cars anymore in the city. So we're going to take this parking space away and we're going to maybe make a visitor center or something. And so the whole competition was, how do we use the parking space? How much do we transform it? How much do we open it up also to the cathedral? And that was the big question, of course. How do you relate to an existing situation, to a monument that is that important? And so we did a lot of research in the beginning of iconography of Notre Dame Cathedral, which was very healthy for us because you see with all these different pictures that Notre Dame, which has this very fixed and set image of this cathedral in stone, well, people look at it very differently. Everyone has their own relationship to the monument, and it can be joyful, it can be religious, it can be, and it's very diverse. In the representations, it's diverse. In the reality, it's diverse. And so one of our ideas in the project was to say we have to really keep this diversity of ideas, of visions, of perception. And so we have to make as much room as possible for the cathedral. We never went there before the competition because it's a touristic place, the central city of Paris. But when the competition, we started to go. And it's great to be there, actually, because you see people that are so happy to be there. I mean, it's a really joyful place. It's a little bit on the same at the cathedral in Cologne. I mean, people are happy. And it's kind of, if you're a bit depressed, that is where you should go. Not to look at the cathedral, but to look at the people, because it's quite fascinating. It's a joyful place. And so those were the guidelines for us to say we give room to the cathedral. We kind of try to work on multiplying all the points of view that you can have of the cathedral. It's not just the front, it's also the back, it's how you walk around, etc. And then we have to find a way to connect it more strongly to the island. And so the idea with the visitor center was to say, okay, we are going to use the parking structure completely, and we are not going to open it up to the cathedral. We are going to make it as invisible and as disappearing as possible. And so we are just going to do 2 big staircases that go down into this parking space and one new elevator that goes down, and that's going to be it. And for the rest, you can just circulate and you can still have this relationship with the cathedral. And so these were the different points of views that you're going to have with the staircases. And then we're going to transform the underground. And the underground is this. This was the image that we found during the competition where you have the parking structure You see the cathedral in the back, and you see the structure. This was before they built the intermediate slab, because it's a two-story parking structure. And it's a quite fascinating image because, of course, it's a parking structure and it's a mass of concrete, but it has a rhythm, it has a structure, it has a direction. I mean, it's a little bit of a cathedral in itself. And it was quite interesting to see these images because we just felt that, I mean, you have everything in this and the space is there. And we've already poured all this concrete. So now let's use it and make as little as possible. And so the project is based on this idea that we use the parking structure. We make as few intervention as possible. So we remove the intermediate slab to recreate this kind of height. We keep all the pillars and the beams in the ceiling, and then we create this space with the two staircases going down, which is not even a building in itself, because it's not an isolated space. It will be covered like a passage in a way. And then you have different programs on the side, which we add with different glazing. So you can see here is the parking structure, the crypt that is right next to it. There's no connection. And then you have the Seine and the small quay on the other side, three completely separate worlds. And this is the project. What we're doing is we are creating this sort of central space. We are connecting, we are creating a new entrance to the crypt from the central space, and we are opening up on the Seine. So we are recreating the connection between the crypt and the Seine, and which was the initial reasons for why there was a city here, is because you had water and you had the Seine. And so this whole space in the middle, it becomes a sort of we called it the passage. Sometimes now we call it the vestibule, sort of a place of preparation of the visit, but it's also a space in itself. It's a space in the summer which will be cool when it's very hot outside. In the winter, when it rains, you can go and you kind of find a refuge in a way. And so it's a sort of a collective space which is specific because it's a specific structure that we are transforming, quite radical in its proportions, but that is really designed as a sort of interior promenade. And in that sense, it's not it's different from the Parent project that I showed, where we have this collective promenade. And so you see the incidence on the upper level is very small. You just have two staircases, and the two staircases, they're oriented towards the cathedral, so that when you walk down or up, you're sort of in a relationship with the cathedral. Here you see the section today. So you have the crypt, the parking, the Seine. And again, this connection articulation. It's very few things, but what we're trying in the end is to connect things together. Here you see in the other direction, you can see the section of the parking, the two stories, the suppression of the slab, the two staircases going down, and the space in the middle with the central staircase that leads also to the crypt. This is a competition visual, so it's today a little bit more precise, changing a little bit, but essentially this is the space underneath, which is, again, it's not a building, it's not a landscape, it's something in between. And here you can see just a couple of images of the staircases when you go down, and this sort of central space, and of the staircase when you go up, where we also try to recreate the sort of original vision that you have of the cathedral when it was built 800 years ago, where the plaza was much smaller. And so you had this kind of ascending, much more strong relationship with the cathedral. We're trying to recreate that with the staircase without building. So just like the Parent housing project that I showed, it's an attempt to sort of produce an environment, to make a few articulations, a few actions, but to produce an environment that connects also the idea of architectural landscape, to make the building in itself a little bit disappear, so that you just have potentially a good place where you can meet, where you can discuss, where you can talk. And I think that's for us what's architecture is about. I think in the end, it all comes down to how things go together and how things connect. This is Eames that I like to quote, which says it very well, that eventually everything connects. So I just wanted to conclude with a little book recommendation, which I like to do. We are in Germany, so maybe you've all read this already. If you haven't, this is a book written by Otto Eicher, which was a graphic designer. It was published right after his death in 1991, I think. And it's a collection of texts. It speaks about design, but also quite interestingly about the question of aesthetics and how aesthetics influence us in very often maybe not such a good way. And so it's in the context of today, it's a very interesting book to read. If you haven't, I advise you to do so. Thank you very much.